Many people struggle with cutting binders board, and in this video I'll cover how I measure and cut board. I believe following this approach most people will be able to consistently cut board to a high level of accuracy with square corners. There is no right or correct way to measure and cut board, but what I'm going to demonstrate is my approach built up from what I've been taught from bookbinders and my approach to measurement and repeatability as an experimental physicist. Different circumstances arise all the time and you have to adapt to these. By not being too rigid in approach, I believe the techniques I follow work well. There are more prescriptive approaches which also work well, such as Tine Noreille's, and if you prefer this type of approach, you might like to check out her video. I keep board stock in full sheets and pre-cut oversize for A4 and A5. I would only cut board from a full sheet for a very unusual sized piece. And then I would cut it from the sheet roughly oversize and then cut it to the final size by hand. I do have the luxury of a board cutter. Cutting large sheets of board by hand on the bench can be difficult, but I did it for many years before I got the board cutter. If I have time, I'll explain how a board cutter blade and a paper guillotine blade are different and why cutting board with a guillotine is not the best idea but can be done. In my approach, cutting a board to size starts with a board slightly larger than what the final board will be, and the first cut is truing up a long edge. Most of the board I cut is for book covers or boxes. Machine-made board, like paper, has a grain direction and the grain should run head to tail just like the paper. All my pre-cut board is long grain, the direction required for book cover boards. Before we continue cutting, we have another digression. The knife you use is very important. My preferred knife for board is the Olfa SVR1 9mm snap-off blade knife with the standard blade. I have two of these knives on my bench. The other has the thinner ultra-sharp blade in it. The ultra-sharp blade, which is black, is fantastic for cutting paper, but because it is thinner it can flex and cause the cut in thicker board to not be vertical. If I could only choose one blade, it would be the standard blade. Both work very well for paper and board and each have compelling advantages for each. The main reasons this knife is head and shoulders above the rest is the quality of the blade, with a great balance of sharpness and the hardness of the steel, which means it goes blunt slower than others, and the rigid thin steel body feels nice in the hand. There's other good knives. Before I discovered the Olfa, I used the Scotch titanium 9mm utility knife. This is still a great knife and I have plenty of them in my box of tools for workshops. Of course, for this knife to work to its potential you have to use the refill Scotch titanium blades. I'm sure there are other good brands of 9mm snap-off blade knives, but these are the ones I use. The cheap plastic ones from the hobby store won't cut it. Some people feel that for heavier board you need to use a heavier knife. In the past, the go-to knife was the Stanley 99E box cutter. And this is a great knife, and I have one hanging on the pegboard at all my workspaces. But I don't use it for cutting board. The blade is not as sharp as the Olfa, and it is thicker, and thus there is more drag on the knife as it makes a wider cut. This results in you using more force, which means you're more likely to go off the line. And refreshing the blade is more time consuming than just snapping off the tip. While a great utility knife, I see only disadvantages for cutting board. When I first started bookbinding, I was taught to use a clip point or a cobbler's knife for cutting board. It works great, but keeping the tip sharp is more trouble than it's worth. Having said that, I keep one extremely sharp, and if I did need a heavier knife, this is what I'd go to. The next most important tool to consider is the ruler. I'm also very fussy about rulers. The problem that most people have with rulers is that they slip around. Some people like cork or rubber-backed rulers to avoid this. I do not like these rulers for a couple of reasons, but the main one is that the anti-slip material holds the edge of the ruler away from the material being cut, and the knife can undercut the ruler. That's just not acceptable to me. Another approach is to put a very fine abrasive paper on the back of the ruler to make it non-slip. This can mark or otherwise damage delicate papers, and is also not acceptable to me. I prefer thick, not flexible, stainless steel rulers with a matte finish. The matte finish helps grip the material being cut, while the rigidness of the ruler extends away from your hand the downward force being applied to the material being cut. The worst style of ruler, I think, is a flexible one with a shiny chrome or polished surface. For my approach, the ruler must be a machinist's ruler, where the end of the ruler is the 0 mark. All of my rulers also have the other end rounded with a hole for hanging up. This doesn't affect functionality, but it's nice to have. I'm yet to find the ruler that is marked the way I would like. My ideal ruler would be metric on one side and inches the other. The metric side would be whole millimetres only on both edges, no area of half millimetres. The inches side would have inches divided into 1/16 on one edge and 1/32 on the other, and nothing finer. No tables, nothing else to clutter the ruler. I have 30cm and 60cm Toledo rulers at each of my main work areas, and a 1 metre ruler in each room. If there was ever such thing as a bookbinder influencer, and I was one, I'd be looking for a ruler manufacturer to make the DAS bookbinding range of bookbinding rulers to my specifications, especially the markings, because I'm yet to find a ruler I completely like. To cut material without damaging your bench surface, you do need some form of cutting mat. This could be a sheet of binder's board, or better still, a self-healing cutting mat. I like the Olfa brand ones, which take a lot of use before needing to be replaced, but cheaper ones will work too. One thing that is essential in my approach is a straight edge backstop fixed to the bench top to push material and measuring tools up against. For most people, I would recommend a bench hook, which is easily made, and I have a video on how to make one, or it could be a heavy-duty ruler or a straight piece of wood clamped to the bench. My main work benches have a piece of wood screwed to the back edge. The main thing is that it has to be very straight and not let thin material like paper slide under it. The final thing that is required is at least one square. I use a combination of plastic squares with a steel ruler, but you could use a metal square or a metal edged square. It just has to be an accurate right angle square. Okay, back to cutting. After I straighten or true an edge, I mark it with an F for finished. I was taught to mark finished edges like this by my high school woodworking teacher, and I've carried this into my bookbinding. I've also seen professional bookbinders who use an arrow to mark finished edges. I then push the straight edge of the board into the backstop, and using the square and ruler, I square up one end. As a right-hander, I cut to the right of the ruler. I also try to cut on the waste side. If I veer off the edge of the ruler, I can move the ruler over a few millimeters and make the cut again. Next, I cut the board to height. Since I want to cut to the right of the ruler, I flip the board over so the edge I just cut is to the left. I make the measurement of the height from the cut edge, which means the 0 end of the ruler is to the right. With one eye closed to remove parallax error, and with my eye in the same plane as the end of the board, I can put the measurement on the sharp edge of the board to within a fraction of a millimeter. I then mark the cut position using the tip of my knife. I slide the tip of the knife up to the end of the ruler and push it into the board to make the cut mark. Using the plastic square and the steel ruler, I put the tip of the knife into the cut mark and then slide the ruler up to the knife by pushing it with the square. I then cut the board to height. On some boards, I leave cutting the foredge to width until after it's attached to the book. But if I am making the final cut at this stage, I rotate the board 90 degrees, measure the width, and cut the same way I cut the board to height. I then check the board to the book block to make sure the squares are as I expected and that I've not made any measurement errors. Most books require two boards the same size. I cut the second board the same way, except instead of using a ruler to make the measurements, I usually use the first board. Cutting boards to width works well because the board is wide enough to be stable up against the backstop. This doesn't work well for cutting thin strips of material, such as spine stiffeners. To cut a thin piece of material, I cut the first three edges as usual, but for the width, I use the ruler to measure the width and make cut marks with the knife tip at the head and tail of the material. I then align the ruler as before by putting the tip of the knife into the cut marks and pushing the ruler up against the knife. I do this at the head and the tail of the material. You know you have aligned the ruler with the cut marks well when you feel the knife drop into the cut marks as you cut the material. If the material is very thin, it's not practical to cut on the waste side of the marks. After making the cut marks, rotate the board and cut on the non-waste side. If you happen to make a mistake, you simply square up the end and measure the width again and repeat until you get it right. To wrap up, I'll say something about cutting action. Don't try and cut through board in one pass. This will cause you to apply excessive force to the knife, which will cause the blade to bend and for the cut to go offline. Use multiple passes instead. Keep the knife vertical and draw it back with most of the movement coming from your shoulder. Stand so the line of the cut is to the dominant side of your body. If you're drawing the knife towards the center of your body, you will get in the way of your arm and cause the cut to veer. As I said at the start, there's no one correct way to cut board. This is how I cut board, and I find it works well for me. You can either follow this approach or you can take techniques from multiple sources and develop your own approach. The main thing is to have a repeatable process that results in boards of the correct size with square corners. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. As always, I really appreciate you hitting the big thumbs up button. If you're able and want to, you can support the making of more videos like this through Patreon or with a one-off contribution, and the details are in the description below. To find videos I've made on specific topics or other projects, the best place to go is the DAS Bookbinding Video Guide. It's the index to the channel, and there's a link in the description below. If you want to be notified of my future videos, please hit the subscribe button and select the notification bell. Until next time, cheerio.